and when we're not having productive, grace-filled, pragmatic discussions about human pain is when you get people trading blowjobs for pills in a parking lot. It's when you get families who know what the inside of a rehab smells like better than their own house.
Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
Dr. Kristen.
You are exceptionally welcome to the final video in our coverage of Hulu's phenomenal, sensational, life-altering docuseries drama Dopesick. We're up to episode 8, The People versus Purdue Pharma. And if you watched our episode 7 coverage, you know we've had a couple of weeks in between when we filmed episodes 1 through 6 and when we filmed episode 7 and 8. A lot of things have changed, but especially for the start of this episode, it's worth saying again, because this episode opens in 2019, which is when we see a series of protests taking place all over the world at establishments where the Sacklers' names are on buildings. So it's medical schools at academic institutions, the Louvre, the Guggenheim, the Met, all these places. We're seeing a wide protest movement. Shame on Sackler is the chant that is being chanted, particularly in this exhibit from the folks lying on the floor at the base of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, including Betsy's mom.
Take Down Their Name is the other one, which is, if you want to Google the movement, Take Down Their Name is the one that I found the most often on social media.
Yeah. So we open with the global protests to have the Sacklers' names taken down from buildings because of their role in the opioid epidemic. Now pandemic, arguably, since it's everywhere, or their influence is everywhere. And so it's worth noting, we would like to say one more time, the good news that in the last few weeks, the Metropolitan Museum of Art has taken down the Sacklers' name from everywhere it was on their property, which is massive news. Massive, massive news. Shout out to all the freaking protesters and activists and petition signers and banner makers and all those folks who worked so hard to put that much pressure on this institution. We hope, as our friend, fake friend, only online friend, Patrick Radden Keefe, who is the author of The Empire of Pain, has proclaimed, and a lot of people agree with him, that this is potentially a bellwether for a lot of other institutions. They were waiting to see what the Met would do. The Louvre, the Guggenheim, Harvard, all these places.
Tate Modern,
like... It was funny.
Oh, the Victoria and Albert Museum too. Evidently, there's a big thing there with their name on it.
Yeah, because side tangent. Patrick Radden Keefe was in London a few weeks ago. I think it was before we were in Charleston. At a book launch at an awards. Oh, he was nominated for a book award for Empire of Pain, and it was being held in the Tate Modern, and. Or the Victoria and Albert, I don't know. But they were in the reception room, and his publicist, looked at him, and behind him, through the doorway, was a sign that said the Sackler Room. And he was just like, what is happening? This is way too meta, but he used it as an opportunity to talk about why we need to take all the names down. And he said, you can't fling a book in London without hitting something named for the Sacklers. So there's a lot of things that need renamed, and those names taken down. So we are glad the Met capitulated to all the pressure that's been happening for a long time. And we hope it is one of the first of many dominoes.
We would also like to shout out the various attorneys general throughout the United States who took the case to sue Purdue Pharmaceutical, which then led to the bankruptcy of Purdue Pharma. Let me say, from a business perspective, this is very normal. When companies are sued like a crap ton, you file for bankruptcy so you can restructure all your assets. Mm-hmm. And in a publicly traded company, that's one thing. The really gross thing about Purdue is that it's like 5 people own the whole damn thing. And so, again, we said this last week, we'll say it again. When the original bankruptcy case was filed, it was declared that the Sackler family was immune from civil litigation. And a federal judge at the beginning of December said, oh boy, that's a no. And reversed it that now the Sackler family can have civil liability towards the murders that they've perpetrated for the last 30 years. So it'll be very interesting for us. Dr. Aaron and I are talking on December 20th. Mm-hmm. So if you're watching this on December 27th or something, I think. So it's possible a lawsuit has been filed in between these times. But we will be watching with bated breath to see who the first person is to personally sue Richard Sackler for the death of their loved one. Because I would imagine that civil case will actually have several million names on it.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's been in the process of being written for a long time, hoping that, the day that they can file it, they will file it. So, yeah, shout out to the attorneys general, shout out to all the lawyers and all the people that have been fighting so long. We still have a lot of fight left to do, but as this episode shows us, and at the beginning and throughout, and as we've talked about now in the little prologue before our content coverage, there is hope on the horizon, that we will be able to hold the Sacklers accountable for the violence that they've perpetrated against our nation and others. Okay, so we open with the 2019 and then we flash back all the way to 2002. Phoenix is about to get off probation. He's at the probation officer's office. And he sees Elizabeth Ann, who is the girl with the birthmark on her face that we have seen highlighted throughout the story, but not really focused on, as a contemporary of Betsy's, same age, also oxy addict. And at this stage, obviously, Phoenix knows that Betsy overdosed. And so he sees Elizabeth Ann, and he offers to take her out. And this is where, for lunch, and this is where we get kind of the birth of what Dr. Phoenix wants to do for the time being until he can possibly get his medical license back, is give back to the people he believes he has harmed by prescribing them Oxycontin in the first place, by taking them to therapy. And I will say, it is one of the best things. I'm so glad they gave us this story, even though it's fictionalized, about Dr. Phoenix, that we got to see that evolution. So he takes Bets to the clinic to see Dr. Art. She gets on Suboxone. And then we get a series of clips throughout the episode where he's then taking more people.
He buys a school bus to take even more people.
And then he buys a school bus so that he can take the people from his community to the clinic to see Dr. Art. And we talked about this so much in our coverage, that a huge problem, part of the ecosystem of problems that is the opioid crisis and this brand of addiction, is the level of access. And the hardest hit areas, because they were targeted early on by Purdue, were these rural industrialized places where you don't have a CVS down the road, where you don't have a doctor who's a specialist in flipping, opioid abuse, accessible to you. You might not have a car. You might not have the time off of your part-time job to go to a place to get treatment. And so the harm cycle perpetuates in those places because they don't have access to resources. And Phoenix knows this, as a human and as a doctor, and so he becomes the provider of resources, which I just absolutely loved from start to frickin' finish. Yeah. I love.
Also, what book did Elizabeth Ann love that you and I looked at each other and said no one actually loves that book? It was like Faulkner?
No, Vanity Fair.
Oh, Vanity Fair. No one actually loves that book. No.
And I understand why she associates with Bess, or something that starts with a B, the main character's name in Vanity Fair. But like she.
Oh, I knew it until you asked me. But yeah, like Reese. In my mind, I call her Reese Witherspoon.
Reese Witherspoon. Ginger Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah, Ginger Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah.
God.
No.
Thackeray is.
I know. He was like, "What would you recommend for a book?" And she's like, "Vanity Fair," and I was like, "That's a lie. That's a lie." We also get with Dr. Phoenix a visit to Betsy's parents.
Becky! It's Becky.
It's Becky. You are 100% right. It's Becky. Because I wanted to say Betsy, and then I was like, no, it's not Betsy.
No, that's no.
Because like
Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair.
Woo, girl! Pulled that from the back. That was impressive.
Thank you so much. Oh. This is why everyone wants us on their trivia teams. We are available for hire.
Didn't even Google it, folks. There was no Google. There was no IMDb. Straight from the brain. So we get Phoenix visiting Betsy's parents. And I'm going to let you talk about this because you made a really great point just offline now about why this scene was so necessary. But, you know, we learn from it that clearly her parents are still mad at him and...
should be.
And have every right to be. And the conversation that Phoenix has with Betsy's dad, because Betsy's mom walks out of the room, was just fantastic. And I think they got to a stage where they realized there was a difference between like forgiveness and acceptance, or forgiveness and, well, you said reconciliation, so I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, this is one of the interesting things. Before I do that, I want to point out that the scene ends with her dad pulling a flask out of his back pocket, which is the only nod the series really does to the genetic links of addiction.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's one of the things that, as we get more research into addiction, we begin to understand why, you know, different siblings react differently to different stimulants and different kind of things like that. But there is a genetic component to this disease. And because at the time that this series covers, no one was talking about the genetic component with Oxy, it would not have entered this kind of conversation. But now, you know, we need to be talking a little bit more about the genetic component. So let me bring that in really briefly because they won't bring it up again. So I think this scene was so valuable to me for a couple different reasons. One, a big part of working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon, which is like, you know, the support system for people, or Narcon, or, you know, anything, Narcotics Anonymous, is this idea that you have to seek, like, you have to offer some sort of restitution. You have to seek forgiveness from those who you have harmed. And because we don't have a really good, and by we, I mean as a human race, a good understanding of the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, a lot of people kind of go about it in this very messy way, where it's like, well, okay, I need to apologize to you, and then we can go back to the way things were. Well, everyone within the sound of our voices knows how Dr. Aaron and I feel about the phrase, let's go back. But we are not Jack. We cannot go back to the island. So there is no such thing as back. And you're always moving forward. There is absolutely no reason for people to be in relationship with people who have actively harmed them, whether that harm was caused by an opiate or not. However, the psychological ramifications of holding on to bitterness or holding on to anger does in fact cause toxicity within your emotional network. It does. You can choose that toxicity, mazel. You're allowed to. But if you want to be free from that, the act of forgiveness is important. Looking at someone and saying, you know what? Okay, we're done now. We're done. You don't even need to say, I forgive you, if those words make you want to choke. Betsy's mom certainly didn't. But I would imagine that's one of the differences between Betsy's mom and Betsy's dad's conversation.
Yeah.
Betsy's mom still, she needs to be angry, valid. And in lieu of being able to hold the Sacklers accountable, she needs Phoenix to pay for her daughter's death. Unfortunately, no one is actually going to pay for her daughter's death. So I'm hoping as she worked out her grief, by the time we get to 2019 and she's got that fabulous gray hair and she's laying on the floor of the Guggenheim, she has worked out the act of forgiveness within herself and the releasing of that anger and that toxicity towards other people. Yeah. So that's the act of forgiveness. The act of forgiveness is saying, okay, that thing that was heinous that you did to me or that you were a part of causing, I recognize that you can never actually fix this. You can't actually undo what you did. So I'm going to release you from my need for you to undo. You can't. I'm going to still have to hold you accountable. I might still need restitution for what you've done. I might be completely unable to ever hold a relationship with you again. But I release you from my belief that you need to undo what you did.
Yeah.
And in addiction, in particular, when I talk to families, this is, and I'll say for addicts too, they were friends with the people that they used with.
Sure.
They might have even been really good friends with the person who gave them the drug in the first place. How do you walk that? And because we have pretended that reconciliation and forgiveness are the same thing, I think we've stymied some of these folks and their ability to move through their grieving process and redefine what life looks like now, either in physical grief of losing a loved one or in the process of building their sobriety.
Yeah, that was so well said. And I think, we do this with every process of grief and trauma. We talk about trauma here all the time. Hi, you know us. We are trying to say as much as we can as empathy educators that no trauma is comparable and that everyone has to be allowed the space to process their trauma in the way that they have to process it. And you can't say, oh, you should do this because this is the right way through your trauma, or this is what society tells you. And so, this was a case of the show showing and not telling necessarily exactly, because if they wanted to tell, they would have given Betsy's dad the line, like, I forgive you, but I can't, but never come back. Like, they could have given him that line. But that's what they were doing. And it's so important to recognize that there's a difference between, and I think it was an empathetic thing to do. Her dad was like, I understand you. I
just don't ever want to see you again.
I understand what you did. I understand that you're sorry.
And I understand that you don't bear full responsibility here.
Yeah.
But we can't do this ever again.
Yeah.
Be well. I release you. Be well.
Yeah. And it was so, like, you might look at it and it's a short scene. It's a hard scene. It's a short scene in this episode. So much other stuff happens in this episode. You might not have thought we had 8 minutes worth to talk about this, but we did.
Oh, I could keep going. So, to me, this is actually one of the most important scenes in the series because this is the heart of how we wrestle with the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
As humans. Most of us are not special prosecutors.
Right.
And I'll never sit in the FDA, but I have sat in that living room with those people.
Yeah.
I've tried to help people figure out, how do I forgive my son's dealer? I have no idea, but what I do know is that you have to let it go for your own sake.
Yeah.
So let's work that process of what that looks like. If that takes 10 minutes, that's fantastic. If that takes 10 years, let's walk that path. But honestly, believing that punishing them fixes anything is only going to cause you more grief. So how do we wrestle with this together? So in a certain way, if this scene hadn't happened, I think I would have been left wanting.
Yeah. And I think, because it fits in with what Phoenix is doing in this episode, right? This whole process is him making amends. This is part of his recovery.
Oh, yeah, this is his penance. This is absolutely his penance. He's doing the rosary here.
And he said, and her dad asked him, how are you doing? And he said, one day at a time. So, like, and all of these things he is trying to do as amends for the harm that he caused, including, you know, buying a bus and driving them all, and feeling this responsibility to ensure everyone else's sobriety and survival, because he didn't with Betsy. And yeah, and then her dad takes out the bottle from his back pocket, and I, like, fell off my chair. 'Cause you're right. It's a huge part, and they didn't talk about it. They didn't use that as an example of why people become addicts, why people are addicts.
It's a piece.
It is a piece.
And, like, I don't know, I can't remember if I've gone on this soapbox on this or not, but we have not given enough funding on this planet to understanding the science of addiction. We just have not.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of, because addiction is family systems theory, physiology, psychology, trauma work. And you know who communicates really well? Academics. Oh, wait. Lol, JK. None of those disciplines are talking to each other.
Yeah.
So, like, I sit in addiction conferences. I mean, thank God they're all online now, so I don't have to, like, actually go and sit in like Hyatt Regency ballrooms anymore. But, like, from a neuroscience perspective, and then I go and sit in social worker ones, and they are talking different languages. And I'm like, oh my God, we all need to be in one room. Mm-hmm. And we're not. So we don't actually know the true alchemy of genetics, nature versus nurture, access. We just don't know.
Yeah.
But we do know that for many people, the genetic component of addiction is an important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, we don't really get anything more than that from Samuel, except at the very, very end, what they end on for this episode and for this series is we're ending with Phoenix, who runs a wellness center in the mountains, clearly a recovery center, where he's gone he was like, so I'm going to help these people by providing them resources and access, which he takes to its natural conclusion of getting back his medical license and running a recovery center. And maybe at the end we'll talk about his benediction about pain and addiction that came at the end. But that's wrapping up the tale of Sam Phoenix there for us. And then we've got Rick and Randy on the case, trying to find out what happens. As I spoiled in the episode 7 coverage, apologies again for those of you who might have been upset about it. Billy's manager confronts him over the stolen tapes. They're at a party for Amber's new promotion to NOLA. She's heading to New Orleans. And they confront Billy, and he's like, I don't have your tapes. And they're like, cool, we'll bury you in legal stuff and fire you, and your life will be miserable if you don't sign this NDA. Destroy the tapes, give us back the tapes, whatever. You're fired. Sign this NDA, you get $70,000. Don't sign this NDA, you don't get $70,000 as a severance package. So, well, clearly we're building here. And then we're in 2006, and the U.S. attorneys are making their case. Purdue authorizes a settlement for, I think then they offer like $10 million or something. And Brownlee's like, I would like to counter with $1.6 billion, which I loved. But they still need something to get Main Justice on board, especially with individually charging the 3 humans that testified to Congress with criminal charges. So they're like, oh, we never looked into the toppers contest, did we? In a little bit of stage play there. And they end up finding the person who was Billy's manager. And Martin, I wrote down his name, who doesn't work for Purdue anymore, clearly feels he is being followed and is very paranoid about the fact that he doesn't work for Purdue anymore. And he tells the story of why he left over like a series of court cases where he had to prosecute the sales reps that he was like, because they kept trying to be whistleblowers, which is terrible. So he eventually puts them on to Billy. Rick and Randy show up at Billy's flat, and learn that he didn't sign the NDA. And you're all like, oh, he's like, I'll tell you everything. What do you want? I'll tell you everything. And then they were like, we want the tapes. He's like, what tapes? What tapes? And I don't understand. I don't understand why he denied having the tapes. That was something, like, I watched it with my mom. She was like, what is happening? I watched it with you. We were like, what is happening?
He confounds me.
He was ready. He was like, do you want me to testify? I'll tell you everything. We want the tapes. What tapes? Buddy, you just said you would tell them everything. Everything includes the flipping tapes that you stole from your boss. It was nonsensical.
Which makes me think it was real.
Yeah, which makes me think it really happened. Lo and behold, Billy kicks him out, and Rick gets a suspicious package in the mail, and opens it in the office, which, Lord, really? Even after Anthrax? Rick? That wasn't smart. But they get the tapes in the mail. So now they've got the Purdue execs on criminal misbranding, mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Because those tapes went across state lines. Which is great. So they're building on that front, but we also, back in 2002, learn that is when Howard Udell and Richard Sackler and everybody else learn about the petition that Dr. Art was trying to get going that had 10,000 signatures. And that's where we get the start of this story, that is the shifting of responsibility away from Richard Sackler towards these three folks that eventually get indicted by the U.S. attorneys. They offer, those three dudes go to Appalachia. They offer Dr. Art a bunch of money. Sister Julie calls them out on the blood money. Sister Julie, here for it, so they decide not to take the money. But this is also when, in 2002, when we are told that Richard Sackler finds out about Brownlee's investigation. They've got information on the grand jury, and they tell Richard that he has to do whatever he can to avoid liability because there will be criminal charges against individuals. So this is the backstory that we needed to understand why those three people were being charged and not any of the Sacklers, why they were the faces that went and testified to the grand jury, or testified to Congress, unlike in 1962 when it was Arthur Sackler that did. And so Richard passes off, steps down as president in 2002 so that he can avoid that responsibility.
And I'll say, like, this is one of those things where when you read, like, the history of business and capitalism, like, this is just so, like, how things are done. And I wouldn't be angry except that they motherfucking killed people. Yeah. This is just so, like, it's so, like, this is just how business works, except that you literally killed people. Yeah. And that's why, like, the circle I can't square, like, I'm in the middle of a book about Enron right now, and this is so much like Enron. If the Purdue's had been publicly traded, this all would have looked a lot different.
Oh, for sure.
But, like, again, death.
Hundreds of thousands of millions of people. Millions of people died and impacted by greed and power.
Yeah. It was just, like, it was so matter of fact, like, I mean, not that I've sat in, like, those kind of meetings where it's like you have to, because there's going to be criminal prosecution. I've never worked for an organization in which criminal prosecution was a conversation. But, like, the strategy is so just matter of fact. Like, again, everybody files for Chapter 11 if you need to reorganize your finances. Like, this is just so run-of-the-mill how capitalism works, except with death. It's just so bizarre.
I know. And, like, everything that plays out in the end of this case made complete and total sense to me. And we don't get a lot of time talking about the specific administration that was in power. George W. Bush was president of the United States.
It was 2006. Yeah, it was 2006.
George W. Bush was president at the time. But in this episode, we get a little bit more insight into how the political appointees in the Department of Justice do not want to be responsible for holding the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma accountable. And so we get a lot of inside baseball in terms of how these deals get done, with Brownlee learning that the political appointees in DOJ don't want indictments. Purdue will sign off on misdemeanors, plead guilty to felonies, pay a big fine. And Brownlee learns that, he's always been pragmatic, and we've praised his character throughout the series for the pragmatism, because he's the boss. There's a reason he's the boss, because he has to be pragmatic. And he takes the deal. He got them to settle for $600 million, which is the biggest settlement from a pharmaceutical company in the history of the country, which is no small thing. And, I loved that scene that we got with Rick and Randy and Brownlee.
Yeah.
They knew. They were hopeful. They were ethical, moral humans who knew that this was the right thing to do. But they're also living in the world that they live in. And so, they were upset. You could see Rick and Randy okay, so it's over. And then when he tells them $600 million, they're like, Christmas.
Yeah, and that leads into a really good one with Bridget, too, where she's just you built the case that more people can use.
Yeah.
This is the importance of doing the work. And this is the kind of, that kind of scene is when I always say, man, I wish I could be a special prosecutor. Because I love I'm such a cheeseball that I love the metaphor that literally none of us do this on their own. So the next round of people that take the Sacklers to court are going to use what Rick and Randy did. Yeah. And then the people after that are going to use the bankruptcy stuff. And we all just keep building on this. We have an entire legal system built on precedents to remind us that at no singular time, anyone knows what they're doing. So we all need to be learning from each other on a consistent basis. Yeah. But yeah, that scene with Bridget too made me pretty happy.
Yeah, so we get that great scene with the Flying V of Justice, the boy band of justice, as we have named them. And I was just thinking about this as you were talking about it. I wonder if they filmed that scene with Rick and Randy and Bridget before the bankruptcy case. Because, clearly, they were filming some of this show. And maybe we'll be kind enough to get some insider baseball from our friends who are writers at Dopesick one of these days. What the timeline was of that. If they had always planned that scene with Bridget, where she says she brings a sparkling cider because neither Rick nor Randy drink, which I loved that she did that, and then roasted them for it, and then toasted. But tells them really earnestly that, what you did was important because you took the work that I did. And, it must have been so validating for her. Yeah. To see the steps that they made. And did they get as far as they wanted to get? No, we never do. That's not how the justice system works. That's not how life works. Very rarely do we get, swift and total justice. Very, very rarely, if ever. But, all the work that she did, all the work that we were shown that was so disheartening for her, caused the end of her marriage. Very disillusioned. If she we don't have time to cover how much I really hope that's not how her husband ended the marriage. It's a separate rant. It's a separate rant. That scene where he's like, "Oh, it didn't work? Great, you should leave your job." I was like, "What are you? Who are you? You have no idea."
I described that scene to my husband. He's like, "Oh, you would pull me out of the house by my toenails." I was like, "I would in fact do that."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, John, your husband would never in his life do that.
No.
And so, yeah, I really hope the real Bridget didn't have to go through that, but girl. But she must have felt validated by the work that Rick and Randy did. And then hopefully Rick and Randy, because they are real people, we do know, they are real U.S. attorneys. Hopefully they have been buoyed by the bankruptcy case. So we end with an epilogue. We started with a prologue, which was all the 2019 footage of the protests. We end with an epilogue about the recent bankruptcy case against Purdue. Clearly this was post-production added. We get Zoom congressional hearings that happened in August of 2021. So they threw that stuff in there when they had it. And this is where we learn that this bankruptcy case came out of 23 attorneys general for different states, 23 states suing Purdue. over their role in the opioid crisis, leading to their Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And we also, the Sacklers can't run Purdue Pharma anymore. But they tell us at the end of this epilogue that the part of the bankruptcy deal is that the Sacklers cannot be sued. And they cannot face civil charges, which is, again, why the news that came just a week ago is so flippin' fantastic. Because I love there's a congressperson, and I don't know his name, that is talking about it, or maybe a reporter, I'm not sure. There's somebody in this epilogue clip that's talking about it that's like this bankruptcy case isn't taking any yachts away from Kathy Sackler. Like, they're fine. The Sacklers are fine. And that's the problem. Purdue can restructure.
I think it was a comment. Sure. I think it was a talking head on MSNBC. I feel like that.
Yeah, it was, somebody said it. Somebody was like, they're not going to pay this bankruptcy suit with their yachts.
No, but now they might.
Now they might. So, I love this connection that we've made, and you just made it even stronger with the way you talked about those scenes with Rick and Randy and Bridget and Brownlee, that we have to keep building. And that's where this series ends. Aside from Samuel, which maybe we'll give Dr. Kristen a benediction about Samuel's benediction in a minute here. But we see these, the protests that start in 2019, the public pressure to get the Sackler name removed, the 20 states suing Purdue for their role in the epidemic, all of this is because of the grand jury case that Rick and Randy and Brownlee as U.S. attorneys for the Western Virginia did, and because of the Bridgets, and because of every person who saved an email or stole a tape or testified, signed a petition, like all of it. And we have to keep going until, one of our calls for justice, one of our, I want public stocks, Dr. Kristen wants Richard Sackler destitute and in a pauper's grave. We all want things. It's nice to want things, and we're going to keep working until hopefully we can get some justice for these families. But they take us to the lovely end of this epilogue is Sam Finnick's watching the coverage of the pharmacy case, watching the talking head, turns off his television at his wellness center in the mountains and goes to a therapy session with the addicts that he is helping through recovery. It was a beautiful benediction. I'll say benediction. So, Kristen, any thoughts on the end?
I mean, he said it exactly what I would have wanted to say. So much of this is that people are in desperate pain, and it hit me, I think, differently sitting here into season 3 of COVID, and watching, God, we're all in a trauma response, and so many people are being terrible to each other out of extreme, undirected pain. Mm. Philadelphia gun homicides are up something like 400.9 trillion%. Not really, but that's what it feels like. And my phone buzzes literally every day with somebody dead to gun violence in this city. And that's the ones that get reported.
Sure.
So it's there's in scripture, we talk about the earth groaning for redemption, that the earth actually groans for it. And I think right now in history is when the earth is groaning for peace. We are groaning for healing, and we are groaning for whatever the hell is next. And in the middle of it, the general population is not having productive conversations about pain. Mm. And when we're not having productive, grace-filled, pragmatic discussions about human pain, is when you get people trading blowjobs for pills in a parking lot. It's when you get families who know what the inside of a rehab smells like, better than their own house. Because at the end of the day, what happens with folks who are addicted is that they simply do not have coping mechanisms for their pain. We are all in pain. We are all traumatized by various things, and we all have coping mechanisms. Perhaps yours is a bubble bath and a glass of wine. And then someone's kids is a whole bottle of Crown Royal and 160 of Oxy. Because that's what it takes to make the pain go away. So think about that. For you, your pain goes away with a bubble bath, and their pain needs an opiate.
It's all pain.
It's all pain.
It's all
trauma. All trauma. And it is on us as a society to stop isolating pain and talk about it as something we can communally address. Because Dr. Aaron brought this up either this episode or last episode. In all of my years of looking at addiction, the thing that perpetuates addiction is isolation. Mm-hmm. The thing that perpetuates it is shame. The thing that perpetuates it is a lack of science and a whole lot of other things. But shame and isolation.
Isolation, sure.
Sunlight, as Dr. Aaron says, is the best disinfectant. These people are in pain. And the last thing they need is your condemnation for their coping mechanisms. But that's often what we give them. So I hope that the last 8 hours of our lives, as we've talked to you, has added to this fight. If there's one person that signs that DOJ petition because you guys joined us for an episode, that would make all of this worth it, to be honest. I hope you understand better now the human cost of pain management in this country and on this planet. And my prayer, my deep and honest and true prayer for you is that you never have any idea what the street cost of OxyContin is. My prayer is that you are protected from that. Because that's a hellscape that no one needs to know. But I know there's an oxy epidemic of whatever that has touched your life. And so I hope as many people don't feel quite as alone as the Sacklers are being held accountable now. I hope your Sackler family gets taken to light and justice as well.
I would like to add to that my profound thanks to all the folks who were involved in making Dopesick.
Yes.
We have talked about this throughout our coverage, but it's a rare thing, I think, to have a piece of art that like profoundly alters who you are and how you see the world. Really. I mean, we all get changed in little ways by lots of stories, and we talk about this all the time. Nobody ever makes a change through shame. We change through telling stories. And that's the beauty of art, and that's why we cover art in the work that we do, and that's why we feel so strongly that it is necessary as empathy educators to look to the art that we're producing, either to critique it or to praise it, or both. But I didn't realize until I watched it how much we needed this story to be told. And how necessary it was. And how profound it is to have it now. And we've talked about this with some of the other stuff that we've covered, unorthodox, unbelievable. And the way that it has, now we have this thing that we can show people and we can talk about. So I know from Dr. Kristen and I, profound and deep thanks to all the folks involved in Dopesick, Danny Strong and all the show creators and the writers and all the actors and everybody. This was a really, this because you're watching this was a really hard sit for both of us, Dr. Kristen especially, but incredibly valuable, and for telling a story that helps people know that they are now seen and understood wherever they intersect with this trauma and with this pain, is invaluable and incalculable. And it doesn't matter if you win 80 awards or no awards. you've done a great service for taking the time to tell these stories.
The Globes are a joke anyway, so we're all holding out for the Emmys.
Fingers crossed for the Emmys.
Well, pals, we're not entirely sure what we're going to end up covering next on the series. It's probably going to be something else full of sunshine and rainbows, like a cult of some fashion. And so as we finish this, we finished 2021 having this conversation,
Whew.
our deep hope for you is that whatever pain you're in right now, that you find something that brings hope in the process of processing that pain. And we will be delighted to see you in 2022.
Take care, everybody.